So look, guys, welcome to this special edition of Soda Social. We're doing it in partnership with OVO Energy in aid of Earth Day 2021. Today, we're going to explore tech, the future of sustainability. My name's Dan Mapstone, and I'm going to be your host and chair for this evening. Just a little bit about me. I'm a principal consultant here at Trust in Soda, part of the Trenovo Group. I focus on supporting companies as they grow their digital and engineering teams. In terms of my background, being green as a buzzword and sustainable is always something I've been quite passionate about. Before I fell into recruitment, I was a youth and community worker for about 5 years, and we did a number of projects where we supported young people becoming more conscious and aware of and encouraging them to make their communities more conscious and aware of their economic and environmental impact. This is something I was thrilled to learn about that Trenovo take rather seriously and truly incorporate into their business strategy. So my plan for this evening is for this to be as informative and interactive as possible. So whilst we do have a loose agenda around our panel discussion, I do want to encourage you to be as active as possible in our chat function. So please ask whatever questions you may have, obviously within reason. So I think we've also throughout the evening, we'll have a number of polls for you guys to take part in. So no further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our panelists. First up, we have Pavegen from Pavegen.
Hi, so yeah, as said, I'm Pavegen from Pavegen, tuning in from London. So Pavegen is essentially about captivating and engaging people in clean energy and, more importantly, sustainability. You know, we make energy fun and we make people part of the solution and hence part of the experience. We use that excitement and we use that captivation to help influence people and influence behavior and change the way people behave around energy. We work in sectors including education, smart cities, retail and smart destinations. And we've got customers including Google, Diageo, Adidas, predominantly, unfortunately, not a lot of our work's here in the UK. We have just done an installation in Leighton Buzzard of all places. So if anyone's ever going to Leighton Buzzard, like do take the opportunity to walk across our Pavegen or even go to Leighton Buzzard for that reason. I mean, I'm like, there's a few other things to do, of course, but definitely go and check it out. Most of our work tends to come from the Middle East and Hong Kong, and more recently the US. Hong Kong in particular seems to be really popular. We've done a lot of really interesting and cool stuff there. Myself, I've been in marketing and renewable energy and sustainability for around 15 years. I actually got into it because of the White Knight gas heated tumble dryer, which I imagine no one's heard of. And it was my first job out of uni. It was for a company called Crossley. And when they showed me I started to market this gas heated tumble dryer, because it was gas, it made it more energy efficient. And that was my first introduction to the idea of energy efficiency. And then from there, I started working with the Energy Savings Trust and I got to know some people through them. Then I joined a building company and we were moving into renewable energy and I worked with them for a good few years. We had Deborah Meaden and Theo Paphitis invest in us via Dragon's Den. In fact, the episode was quite hot. It was quite a hot contention between the guy and some of the dragons. I then went on to work around solar energy. In particular, I went to work with a company called Belectric, which is a utility scale solar company. So as far as solar goes and renewable energy goes, I've worked right through from domestic homes to utility scale. But I arrived at Pavegen about 8 years ago, and it's the mission and it's like what we believe in and what we're trying to achieve that I find which has really attracted me to them. That engagement, participation, awareness, the way that I see energy going and the way that I see the sector going is more around the next step, which is actually around, pun intended by the way, it's actually around the behavioural change. The technology's there, the opportunity is there. Now people need to start to engage and start to push governments and push businesses to make this happen. And that's the place that I think Pavegen has. And apologies, I didn't give any clue to move the slides along as I went. So I've skipped right past them. All I did was that picture. Sorry about that. There you are. There's, in case you need to see my name again.
No worries at all. Thank you so much, Pavegen. Next, we have Ben White, who's the head of engineering at Kalooza.
Hey everybody. Yeah, so thanks, Dan. I work in Kalooza in our flexibility platform, and Kalooza is actually one of the OVO group companies. So even though we're kind of not headlined as Kalooza, we're actually part of the same group. So kind of working in the same company, as hopefully hear from like in a bit. And I think rather than, I suppose, tell you too much around what we're building, what I thought I'd do is tell you a little bit about the kind of problem that we're trying to solve. And I think really it starts with the fact that, you know, we're kind of at the beginning of an energy transition, but that transition is real. So as you can see on this slide here, like the current energy generation model is quite centralized in that energy is, kind of generated in, large thermal plants, and that's, kind of distributed like one way all the way down to individual households, but generally matched to the demand of those particular households on a real-time basis. But there are a couple of key trends which are presenting challenges, I suppose, as we move to a new distributed energy generation setup. And the first of those is like a significant increase in demand from a transition to like electrified transport and heating. And the other is the integration of renewable generation, which is much less controllable and predictable into the grid. So for example, you can't just get the sun to shine, when you need it to shine in order to match the available demand, and you can't get your wind turbine to kind of switch on at the exact time that you need it. So really the implication from these trends is that the grid needs to change from kind of being demand led, so firing up fossil fuel based plants to meet the demand, to more of like a supply led grid where the demand is matched to the available supply. So this is a problem we're trying to solve. So Lisa, if we just jump onto the next slide, or Alfie, yeah. There we go. And so I thought, it might be worth just calling out some of the things that we can kind of already see, the impact of the energy transition. And here are a couple of highlights from the last 18 months. So you can see on the left-hand side, this was back in end of 2019, where we had actually negative pricing on the grid. So if you were exposed to this pricing, you'd be actually paid as a customer 8p per kilowatt hours in order to consume energy. So it's better than free energy. You're actually getting paid to consume energy. And this was due to an abundance of wind energy on the grid, and also like a lower demand than usual. And in order to shift that off the grid to prevent problems, actually it's cheaper to pay people to consume it than it is to stop generating. And then on the converse, on the other side, on the right-hand side of this, quite recently, actually, here you can see where the price has hit like the highest level since 2001, which is £4 per kilowatt hour. So with a usual price of about 15p per kilowatt hour, this is quite extreme swings in volatility, due to the fact that we've got this imbalance on the grid. And so really the challenge is around being able to keep the supply and demand in balance. And this is the problem that we're working on at Kalooza, on a flexibility platform. So we've built a platform that connects to thousands and thousands of residential flexibility assets, so things like electric vehicles, storage heaters, and residential batteries. And we automatically optimize the charging and discharging of these devices in order to match the charging of those when the price is lowest to the end customer, but also the carbon intensity of those is lowest. And so maybe finally, just as a quick example, we have a portfolio of vehicle to grid chargers, and looking at this little graph on the bottom here, what we're actually doing is charging up those vehicles, like at the times, this graph shows like the daily energy price, which is quite strongly correlated with carbon intensity, charging up the vehicles at the lowest point, the lowest cost in the day, and then discharging them back to the grid at that kind of peak between like 4 and 8 p.m. So storing up that kind of green and low cost energy, and then discharging it back to the grid at times of peak intensity to offset carbon emissions from kind of thermal generation. So that's a bit about what we do. I think I've used up most of my time in kind of giving you a bit of an overview of that. But outside of work, I've also been dragging my 1930s house into the 20th century with various things like kind of external insulation and kind of sorting those kind of things out. So yeah, that's me.
Amazing. Thank you, Ben. And now we have Jess from kosher, who is a software engineer at kosher. Leave it to you.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. Happy Earth Day. As Daniel mentioned, I'm Jessica, and I'm a software engineer at kosher, the search engine that plants trees. So if you haven't heard of us before, you can go to kosher.org. It's a search engine, just like any of the other main ones that you might be using, with the big difference that we're putting all of our profit into climate action. This slide is actually a little bit old, so it says 100 million trees planted, but we're actually now well over 120 million and still counting. We're actually, with our users' support, able to finance at the moment about 1 tree every 1.3 seconds. And if you could go to the next slide for me, please. So I just wanted to share a couple of images. Of course, there's so many, so it was a bit difficult to pick, but just to give you an idea of some of the projects that we've been working with, we're actually working with around 60 different projects in 30 different countries all around the world. And we value working with these partners who are local and able to really take care of the trees, because it's not just getting them in the ground, but also ensuring that they stay there, protecting them from wildlife and from fire, for example. And also the last picture in the bottom there is of our team in Berlin, because as much as it's also about planting trees and protecting trees, it's also about legislation and demonstrating that we need change at a higher level as well. If you could go to the next slide. And also, by offering an alternative on the web and making people more aware about the impact that their online activity has. So I think for most people, we have an idea or we have some kind of concept of how taking a flight or driving a car might have an impact on the environment, but it's a lot less tangible to think about it in terms of online activity. And I think this is something that we're trying to make visible, but also provide an alternative to. So, for example, with a search on a kosher, it is actually carbon negative, opposed to if you are making a regular search, on average, we're going to remove like 1 kilogram of CO2 from the air. And actually last year, we were able to run on 335% renewable energy. That's, of course, not all instantaneously. Some of this calculation is, of course, based on the lifespan of the trees. And again, that's why it's really important to make sure they're not just going in the ground, but they are truly staying there as well. So for me, I'm actually a career changer. I previously was a coffee roaster, so I'm quite passionate about different trees. And being able to work and put these new skills that I've learned recently into a sustainable project and a company with such values that Kosher has really been a really positive change for my lifestyle.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Next, we have Philippe, who is the Global Impact Manager from TooGoodToGo.
Good evening, everyone, and yeah, hello. My name is Philippe. Thanks for the intro, Dan. And yes, so I'm Global Impact Manager at TooGoodToGo. My journey really started in the backyards of supermarkets, where I went dumpster diving with friends, and we found out one of the biggest problems of our time, which is food waste. And it really became extremely apparent for me during my studies that I also started writing my master thesis about it. I rented a car, drove around different potato farms in Denmark, where I studied at the time, trying to find out, what is the true issue behind all of this. And the conclusion behind it all is that each and every one of us has a role to play in it, and that really the food system is an absolute mess. And so what I decided was, well, now it's about time to set my career into that path. And I became independent consultant at first. So I did different projects, particularly with the Brazilian market, with papayas, bringing those over to Europe and finding ways of how they can not spoil during that transportation time. I went to Asia to work with 5 to 6 stars hotels in Thailand and in the Maldives to make sure that not all that beautiful food from the buffet ends up going to waste. And then in the end, after all this time, 2 years ago, I decided to join TooGoodToGo, which is a company. You can go to the next slide, Dan. Thank you. Which is basically a company that wants to achieve a planet with no food waste. And in order for us to do so, we try to inspire and empower everyone to fight food waste together. So we do so by really creating awareness, by giving people the right tools and techniques to do so, and really empowering them every single day to fight food waste. And the one which you might be the most familiar with TooGoodToGo is maybe our application, which has now been downloaded by over 30 million people across 15 countries across Europe, and now also in the US. We have saved in 5 years over 70 million meals. So that's 70 million kilos in general, because that's how we could equate it to. So it's a massive amounts which we have done so far, and we're growing at a rapid scale. When I first joined, we were 190 people. 2 years later, we're almost 1,000. So we are really going at massive scale and trying to look at, okay, how can we even create even more impact? And this is really what my job is at the company as well, to look beyond the application and try to find out how can we impact people at home to reduce less food waste? How can we influence the younger generations to not do the same mistakes as the generations before them have made? And also really engaging different businesses all around Europe and the US to really engage with them and to reduce food waste and adopt better practices when dealing with food. And most importantly, we all know that without politics, nothing works. So we're doing also a lot of advocacy work, a lot of putting a lot of events, etc., trying to speak to politicians and trying to make them move in the right direction. And I think I can speak for all panelists that that politics is needed, but they might be extremely slow in taking action. So it's really down to business, which helps to bring about this change. And that's exactly what we're trying to do.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And finally, but last but definitely not least, we have Hope, product lead at OVO Energy.
Great. So, yep, I'm product lead, and I'm specifically product lead for carbon insights in OVO's smart home division. So you've heard a little bit from Ben about the cool stuff that Kalooza in the OVO group are doing on the grid. And I work on a different part of OVO's sort of Plan Zero vision. So that's to help mobilize a zero carbon community. So I guess the problem is, we know we're in a climate emergency and people want to make a difference. But a lot of people don't know how. They find it too expensive, they find it too confusing, they find it too hard. But at the same time, we know that zero carbon living is a reality. Like, it is possible today, like it's something that is achievable. And sort of using smart technologies, we can help make zero carbon homes affordable, but also convenient and comfortable as well. Like, you don't want to live in an uncomfortable house. So yeah, that's what we're trying to do to help our members sort of achieve that zero carbon living. And you can see here some of the tools that I've worked on specifically. So for example, a tool using machine learning to help show people where their energy is going, because you can't reduce your energy use unless you know what you're using it on. And another one here to help you understand when the grid is green. So you could choose, for example, to put your washing on later on when there's more green energy on the grid. So yeah, I guess my passion really is to help it make it easy for people to make those sustainable choices and understand like what choices they're making. And yeah, I guess I'm really looking forward to talking to you guys a little bit more about like what we've learned around that. Yeah, and how we can help people sort of make greener choices.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So we now have our first poll for the audience. Lucy, if you could. So, first question is, has the lockdown and the madness of this last year made you more conscious or aware of your own impact, or how you could be more sustainable? The options are strongly agree, neither agree or disagree, or strongly disagree. You've probably got about a minute to answer that, please. Or Alfie, if you can see that everyone's voted, and please feel free to shut it as and when. Be interesting to see the Strongly agree. Strongly agree. And I mean, again, I would encourage people to use the chat function at this point. Please feel free to throw some examples out as to how you've been impacted. I do have a question that I'd like to address to all panelists, and that is, what technological innovations for you are shaping sustainability within your organizations? For everyone, anyone and anyone.
Okay, maybe chip in on that one. I mean, obviously, the kind of what we're building is, kind of like in terms of a flexibility platform. It's kind of powered by like quite a lot of distributed compute and kind of machine learning algorithms, which are kind of embedded in the core of the platform, like determining kind of how to optimize across all of these different constraints, like get the customer's vehicle ready for when they need it. At the same time, kind of trying to choose the cheapest and greenest energy in order to to charge those. So I think a few key trends, I suppose. Obviously, like just the the kind of IoT and data and kind of scalable compute capacity, but also maybe in terms of I suppose some of the actual energy assets that we're controlling as well. So obviously, battery technology is kind of hugely important, I think, really to the energy transition in general. Obviously, like EVs kind of depend on that massively, as do other forms of kind of storage. So a few things, I think, like specifically like technical on what we've been working on.
Amazing. Give you an opportunity, give it guys an opportunity to weigh in if they've got any burning.
Yeah, I guess from my point of view, like, we're using a lot of existing stuff on the software side, data science and that kind of thing to understand like where are the opportunities to help people reduce their energy use.
Sorry, go on.
Yeah, and then I guess on the hardware side, like there's some cool stuff coming up in terms of zero carbon heating, like some of it existing technology, but I think we'll see more heat pumps, like things like that will start to actually make their way into people's homes and get cheaper and easier. Like I think this year we've seen electric vehicles really take off, and they're just more a part of normal life now. Amazing.
We've got one more part. We've got another poll which leads us into our next question. So if we could have that up now, please. So what methods would help you be more sustainable or remind you of your impact on a day-to-day basis? We have choices here of invest in green technology, reduced food waste, recycle, reduce plastic consumption, reduce meat and diet, switch to renewable energy, energy conservation. Now, while people are answering that poll, I just wanted to sort of give some attention to some of the responses to the last one. So Kev is using his high personal cost and inefficient energy to run his home office rather than working in a shared space, shared energy. So I think that's something we've all been aware of, and is the increase in our bills, and certainly something we're all becoming more and more conscious of. And it's someone that I don't know if they've got a name here, but not being out in the world as much, been hidden from these issues. I did not realize that my local production of garbage in my home increased. My overall waste went down since I was not traveling. So again, I think people, being at home and being faced with the problems directly has made quite a big impact. Interesting. Switch to renewable energy. Ben and Hope, you've got a massive in here. I hope you'll all be signing up to OVO Energy by the end of this call. Amazing. And then so it leads me on to my next question that I wanted to direct at Hope and Philip, really, and that's more directed at individuals and the everyday consumer. What can we do? Well, like as an everyday practice, what can we be doing to make some impact?
Yeah, I can start. I definitely think that there's plenty to be done in regards to food waste, because if you look at the statistics, the vast majority of food that is wasted in Europe, but also in the US where we are at, is wasted at home. And very often the first instance that people usually have is, oh yeah, but I don't waste, or I don't want to waste. And often they lose oversight of what they have in store, so that what they have in their fridges, what they don't store food properly, they overbuy certain products. And that really leads from one moment to the next to a lot of food to actually be wasted, although you actually don't want to. So to be honest, it's not rocket science to think, what has to be changed. But the biggest problem is it's really to do a lot to do with behaviors, habits, and to really have the mindset to do something about it. And I think that is easier said than done, because that does take a lot of changes in your daily lives and also the way you look at it. But the encouraging part of all is that we have the right tools, we have the right things in place. We just need to be willing to do so. And what we do with TooGoodToGo is really try to provide people with all of this information, to give them zero food waste recipes, to give them the right understanding of what a food label actually means, that you can still open it, look at it, smell it, taste it, and not just rely on those expiry dates, because that's really a lot of food being wasted just because of those. So really giving people those insights, I think definitely helps. And definitely that's where we have a role to play as a business, to really give people that consciousness.
Amazing.
Yeah, I agree with Philip here that it's like, it's easy to say like, oh, well, there's nothing that I can do, or feel like my impact is going to have like a tiny, like it's going to have no effect on climate change or like the climate emergency. But like the truth is, like to get to net zero, we're all going to have to make a change, and we're all going to have to sort of get involved. But I also agree that like it's the simple changes that you make to your habits that are the easiest ones to start with. So on my side, using less energy, like easy things are things like taking things off standby, so you're not using them. When you're buying a new appliance, like buy an energy efficient one, and then you don't have to think about it as much after that point. Or scheduling things, like scheduling your heating, so it's not just on all day, it's only on at the points that you need it. Obviously the number one thing I would say, I agree with our attendees that switching to renewable energy is a good thing to do. It is another one of those which is like, it's like one that you do once and you don't have to think about it at least for another year. So it's a good thing to do. And often, like if you haven't switched for a while, you can even find a cheaper deal. And I find actually, like quite often, like you can particularly with energy saving, like you get two benefits. So like you use less energy, you save money, and you help save the climate as well. So win-win there.
Amazing. Just a quick question from William here. I thought was quite interesting. How much food is wasted in small packaging? Given an example of condiments, salt and pepper, I guess it could, anything like, in those small packages that you don't sort of dash away. Philip.
That is a good question. I have not seen any research done in that regard just yet. But if I can just complement a little bit of what kind of food is wasted the most, the vast majority of food that is wasted globally is fruits and vegetables, particularly because it's fresh produce and it spoils very quickly, and people have kind of lost the connection to food and don't really know how to store it properly anymore. So that's really the biggest issue of all, I would say, is definitely fresh produce. And as I mentioned, and also because William touched upon packaging, it really is also down to those expiry dates. So as I mentioned, like there was a study that was done in Denmark that showed that 50% of all yogurts that are thrown away have never even been opened. Wow. And that comes to show that we are just completely relying on what is written on a package before even using our own senses. And that just doesn't make sense. It's not common sense, you could say. So that is pretty striking and pretty alarming.
Yeah. And it's mad. I can say for myself that I definitely, for a long time, I definitely went by, well, if it's best before, then that's best before. But then you quickly learn. You taste, you take a bite of a strawberry. They're fine for at least a few days before. I mean, I haven't dropped dead just yet. So fingers crossed I can keep flirting with those best before dates. We had just wanted to go sort of moving on. So in the run-up to this event, I'm not sure how many of you guys saw it on our LinkedIn, but we ran a poll with our LinkedIn followers where over 150 people voted, and we asked people what they thought the biggest threats that we face in regards to sustainability, and we gave them 3 options really. The first was farming, fishing, and food waste in general, right? Next was oil and gas development, and then the third was deforestation. Okay, now unsurprisingly or surprisingly, depending on where you're sat, it was actually 51% of our audience thought that deforestation is actually the biggest threat that we face. Now, obviously, with that leads quite nicely on to you, Jessica. So, what I wanted to ask you, I mean, from your perspective and the efforts that you guys are making, how can we encourage more sustainable behaviour?
Yeah, maybe first, I think a comment on the reforestation. I think that is, of course, not the only solution. We need multiple solutions, but it is a very viable solution that we can have real impact with for climate. So I think, as I mentioned in the intro, planting new trees is very important, but making sure that the trees in the forests that already exist, of which many old forests are no longer there, is something that we really have to focus on as well. So we also invested in a number of partnerships with groups that are looking at saving parts of original forests, and like I mentioned, if we're planting new trees, making sure that they stay there and at least having a lifetime where they will be able to absorb some of that CO2. I think in terms of encouraging sustainable behaviour, one of the things that kind of jumps to mind that's somewhat related is a bit of a feel-good factor. So on the Kosher website, we have in the top corner a counter that's a personal counter of how many searches someone's made, and you can calculate into how many trees you have personally supported in planting somewhere in the world. And I think I've seen it on a couple of the social platforms can become a bit of a competition. I don't know if you have some family rivalry, because I heard your mum's a big fan of the kosher, so I'm sure she's got lots of trees planted. And I think it's in part that I really think what Hope was saying is also really important, of making it visible for people, making it transparent so people can understand the impact that they're having, but also kind of making it useful and making it fun and personalized kind of really connects people to it. So we have a lot of videos where you can find out more about the projects and the people on the ground that are actually doing the tree planting and the impact that that's actually also having, because of course it's not just about trees, it's about wildlife, it's about communities, it's about people's health as well, and some of the trees that are planted are for nutritional reasons. So I think as Philip was also mentioning, that connection to food and nutrition is a problem probably all around the world, and different ways that we can tackle it from all different kind of angles.
Amazing. Yeah, I think just leading on to that, I think the connection with the senses really, and it's making that common sense connection, isn't it? It's these are things that the earth has given us, and then we've almost gone full speed ahead with the automation and forgot that our connection to the earth is real, it's there, and let's trust that common sense with it. Philippe, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, one thing I just wanted to add to what Jessica just said as well. I think what is really important to keep in mind also with deforestation is what is the prime cause for deforestation, and that is the food system. So it really does come down to really making sure to know what we eat, and also in the end also not to waste all of that food, because when we're wasting food, we're also wasting the resources within. So that goes with all the agricultural lands that we had to make up in order to produce that food. And in order to have that land, we need to cut down forests, because that's the most fertile land there is. So we're continuously always degrading and deforesting our lands even further. And as we are producing more, more and more needs to be cleared. So that's a massive, massive issue. And also because the food system is so interconnected and so global now, that we also, like the second point, which you mentioned with oil and gas, is that we need a huge amount of oil and gas to be able to transport all of this going forward as well. So it's so interconnected, everything with the food system. And some suggestions even say that it's one of the biggest contributor, if not the biggest contributor to climate change. So it adds all of this kind of together, and that kind of makes it quite complex at the end of the day. And that's why it's important to make it visual and to tell people those connections in their everyday lives. And that's extremely important.
Amazing. I mean, I hadn't really thought of that really. And you're right, you know, it is so interconnected. That's, it's mad really when you think about it. So just before we move on to the next question, I think we had a question in the chat saying regarding energy sourcing as a consumer, how fit for purpose do the panel believe the REGO certificate scheme in the UK is, given that there appears to be no obligation to buy the renewable generation, just the certificate? I guess that would be more directed at yourself, Ben and Hope.
Yeah, I guess it's definitely really confusing as an energy consumer. Like, what does it mean? Like, we say 100% green, etc. I know that we have decided recently to like back it up with a power purchase agreement. So I've said like, okay, we're actually going to buy all the energy from Barrow offshore wind farm, to make sure that we're buying the energy as well as the certificates. But I feel like, yeah, the REGO, I mean, it is the certification that we have at the moment. So yeah, it's you know, it's what we've got.
We've got to work with it. Unfortunately, it's almost a work in progress, and I think, you know, I think we've got to be grateful that the fact that there's awareness being made, and even that there is a certificate, you know, stating that. Obviously, it's not going to be perfect, but you know, we're getting there, I guess. Amazing. Barbek, I've got a question for you, mate. So specifically around Pavegen, really, I mean, in terms of the future and smart cities, and how you guys are going to interact with that, I mean, what does it look like?
It's a difficult one, right? It's a broad topic, and I think they change so quickly that before we even get to develop or input a smart city, the concept of it changes again. I mean, something Jessica said about wildlife, I think wildlife and nature and integrating it with build is going to play a massive role in future cities. But in terms of Pavegen and the role we can play and where we see it going, or where we'd like to see it go as well, would be around mobility and well-being. So what we've seen, and we saw this actually before, but we've seen it expedite since COVID, is we've seen that cities are becoming almost like car-free zones. I've written these stats down, so like, excuse me as I just check them out. But like, for example, yeah, Milan are introducing 7 miles of open city, which means just closing the city to cars completely. 22 miles of cycle lanes been introduced in Paris. London's doing a lot of similar things. They're widening walkways all over Europe. Europe's got a particular challenge in that the cities were built a long time ago. They were less populated, therefore they're now overcrowded. So there's that challenge to overcome as well. But these are where I see the big changes, is around mobility and making places safer and easier to access on foot or on on cycle, and to stop cars, especially the diesel cars and the gas guzzling cars, as you can see with like congestion charges, stopping them getting into cities. So that's one area. And then another area is well-being. And again, this is a reaction, I believe, has been expedited again because of COVID. We understand the role that the city and our environment around us plays in our well-being, and making cities, you know, like cities have been built functionally. They are buildings you live in with shops that you shop at and restaurants that you eat at. But actually London is quite fortunate. There's a lot of parks, it's quite green, but now they're building cities with communal areas and places to go. You're seeing like little areas where people can go and grow their own food and veg in cities and on city rooftops, making green roofs and making places for people to meet and to mingle. I think they're the like big changes we're going to see, and that's where that's a role we can play to bring it back to Pavegen for the sake of the original question. The obvious one is walkways. I mean, make walkways Pavegen, and Like, you know, that's the most obvious solution for it. But then, and the role that we can play in well-being, and something that we've been talking to councils about, and London is a great example. I always refer, I'm clearly a Londoner, I always refer to London with everything. But if we take the Underground, and what the Underground's done over the last few years is they show you on the Underground map now, because London's, there's so many tube stations, they say don't get the tube from Covent Garden to Piccadilly Circus or whatever it may be. Like, it's a 10-minute walk. Like, it's a really easy walk. You don't have to use the tube. So Pavegen could have a small area on that route that people are encouraged to use by walking over the Pavegen, that can trigger a reward scheme in their app, which is rewarded by London Underground as a way of encouraging people away from, which is overcrowded underground system, which may get better now because less people are using it. So we may find that starts to find a fix for itself, but that is a problem. And that problem actually became a challenge for the spread of disease and for the spread of viruses, which is something else that will be taken into future cities, right? This is something that we won't lose. Like, I see hand gels and I see certain things being around us forever moving forward, that consciousness of it. So there's that role that we can play as well in helping cities to become better walkways and encouraging people to do it and encouraging well-being as well. So there are two areas that I see cities moving towards, is well-being and mobility. They're two big areas where there's going to be a lot of work done.
Yeah, amazing. And it's interesting that you touched on that, because actually in my notes here, I've got quite it's a bit of a depressing fact, if I'm honest. So sorry, but it's something that is quite sobering, and I think that is poignant, and it leads on perfectly from what you've just said, mate. So, I mean, basically, people who live in high density areas and cities have a 20% higher risk of dying from lung cancer than those who live in less polluted areas. Air pollution is actually one of the biggest killers in the UK.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt, but it's actually something that I get quite frustrated about, because COVID, again, was a great example of where I'm not undermining it in any way, but the news and the pressure and all of the noise around the deaths from COVID in numbers are quite insignificant to what's been happening for a very long time as a result of the damage that we're doing to the planet. And it's quite frustrating to not see that same like attention, and that's, do you know, like, this is a massive problem.
Yeah, it's not comparable, is it?
For a very long time, it just doesn't seem to get the same attention, and it's quite frustrating it doesn't get the same. I understand that it's slightly different because of how sudden COVID was and so on, but it was, you touched on a really good point.
Yeah, and I mean, and that's the thing that I think is quite shocking in terms of, you know, we can often think of it's a problem out there and it's a problem over there that we can choose to ignore, or we can choose to engage with or not engage with. But the reality is, if you're living in a city, you're 20% more likely to develop, you know, a respiratory disease. And I know for myself, I'm an asthmatic, and when, you know, now that I've started to come into the office and travel into London, when I'm going home, I'm having to take my inhaler more. And that's an instant thing that I can see right in front of me, which is, it's just mental, isn't it? And I think that the stats are that there's over, basically worldwide, with the costs of air pollution, I think it's about 2 million premature deaths each year are linked specifically with air pollution. And I guess that leads me on to my question, in the fact of, for you guys, for all, but you know, perhaps particularly Ben, if you're looking at a grid change, but then each of you, if you're consulting with organizations, what changes or what processes can organizations make to adopt more sustainable practices? So, you know, from top down, how can organizations impact change and encourage sort of their wider communities to really be more conscious of this?
I think, I suppose, yeah, I mean, my opinion, obviously, but I think, you know, I suppose the main challenge is to kind of like walk the walk versus, you know, kind of like talk the talk. And I think that, you know, I suppose in the organizations that we work in, you know, like the purpose of the organization is related to sustainable aims, you know. So obviously from an OVO perspective, you know, kind of very much around like reducing carbon impact, you know, from kind of like energy, but also, you know, for our customers, not just as a company in and of itself. And, you know, I think we've seen some of these things in other companies, you know, like set you know, kind of owns like sustainability goals, you know, so net zero targets at various, you know, points over, you know, the next 10, 20, 30 years, you know, like, you know, all the big ones like Amazon, you know, Microsoft, Google. And I think it comes back to, ultimately, like how you embed those sustainability aims, like into the company's culture and into its strategy. And then how that becomes relevant, to the people who are actually kind of working in the organization. So, for example, are people incentivized by, the mission that they're kind of working towards, not just in a kind of from a sense of purpose, although that's important, but also things like, is that, factored into things like, kind of performance reviews and the values of the company, and how the incentives like tie back to the sustainability aims like of the organization. And when kind of talking about these things, does the company, I suppose, like measure itself, from like a like key performance indicator perspective? Like, do they include metrics that actually measure impact against, like the sustainability scores, like whatever they may be? I mean, I suppose a couple of examples from OVO and Kalooza. So like we, when we're talking around, like setting objectives for the teams, like typically on like, quarterly or like half basis, like we often talk about them in terms of what we refer to as Plan Zero, which is like OVO's kind of like overall sustainability mission to become net zero like in operations by 2030, but also enable our customers to lead more sustainable lives. And one of the key metrics that we optimize for, like for the flexibility platform, is the number of flexible customers that we actually have like on the platform. So number of customers just in and of itself isn't like, it's a good metric, but it's not like the best metric, because you could have someone who's got an electric vehicle, for example, connected to the platform, and they decide by overriding our kind of smart control to charge at like the dirtiest, kind of most carbon intensive time of day. So we kind of measure these things in terms of like how the metrics that we're optimizing for, how they line up to the kind of overall the overall company's like mission. And I would imagine, I don't know, but I could have a guess at what Hope's teams metrics, like one of those things might be measured, for example, in terms of like tons of CO2 saved for customers through the tools that her team's developing. So so I think, I mean, another nice example to call out is in terms of how like some of that like cultures like embedded like within kind of where we work over, is that we have an annual hackathon, which is like a 24-hour period where all the tech and product teams like basically have 24 hours to kind of work on something which they want to work on, free reign to work, build something in 24 hours, but it has to be around like a particular theme. And so the one from last year was again around our Plan Zero, so something which aligned to the company's mission to kind of basically reach that net zero target. And there are some amazing, in 24 hours it's amazing what you can build if you kind of give them free reign to do some of these things. And there was one that just kind of came to mind as an example off the back of the question, which was an app which somebody built, or a team, kind of 3 or 4 people, like in 24 hours to basically you point it at take a picture of your meal, and then it sends the picture of the meal off into like a image identification service, and then it comes back and then makes kind of targeted suggestions around, okay, well, this is the carbon impact of all of these different items on the plate, and here's a suggestion of, or you could swap your your minced beef in your bolognese for lentils, and you will save like this much carbon.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
How that, I suppose, is I think in summary, it's like, how do you get those overall objectives and the kind of key mission, like how do you embed that in the in the culture of the the company, like in the strategy, so that people are kind of living it like every day.
Yeah. Jess, you've sort of said, raised your hand that you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I really identified with what Ben was saying around like having actionable goals, and then being transparent with them as well, of like that they are work in progress. So, you might be net zero today, or you might be aiming for net zero in the near future, but then that's not like an end goal. It's like just keep improving on that. So I think at kosher, like I mentioned earlier, we're actually like carbon negative now, because we got to the carbon neutral and felt like, okay, now we need to see if we can take it further, and like we have this goal of having 60% of our revenue towards tree planting, and we're not quite there yet. We're edging, I think, somewhere around the 50% mark, but just like regularly checking to see the progress that you're making. And then we put all of that also publicly online with our financial reports. So our users and anybody, I guess, on the internet can hold us accountable as well, to kind of ensure that that is happening.
It's pretty awesome. It's pretty awesome. We're running out of time before we go into the networking event, but I'm happy to run over because I really, really, really wanted to give Jess the opportunity to sort of shout about some of the work that the kosher are doing, and it ties in well because TooGoodToGo are also a B corporation. So I guess I wanted to give you guys the opportunity to explain what that means in the first instance, and what the potential of that is, and then obviously after that, Jess, I'd also like you to explain about sort of the purpose initiative as well. I think that would be really important for you to touch on as well. So if we could touch on the B Corporation, what that means for each of you, and then after, Jess, if you could just explain a little bit more about that purpose initiative, please.
Does Philip want to go first then, and then?
Sure thing, I can go first. So what does B Corp mean for TooGoodToGo? So for us, it was definitely a certification that we were eager to get to really show that we are a business for good in certain ways, so that we have our purpose right above or even equal to profit. And it's really about the planet first and then thinking about the other rest after that. And that's not just as a business in itself, so our employees, etc., but it comes all the way to the investors as well, who are eagerly investing into our company, and they see that as our biggest value as well. And for us, really what we want to push forward to the most with the B Corp certification is to really be, just like Ecosia is as well, to be a role model, to really show, that you can be a business, that you can sustain yourself. You don't have to be an NGO. You don't have to rely on external funding to be able to do something good on this planet, but that you can actually build a sustainable business while doing something good. And that's really B Corp in a nutshell.
Amazing.
Yeah, I don't know if I can add much to that, to be honest, about being a B Corp, because I think you summed it up really well, Philip. And for sure at Kosher, that has very much been the founder, Christian's, motivation from the start. So Kosher's I think 11 years this year, or 12 maybe. Lost track of time with this pandemic. But Kosher became a B Corp in 2014. And then in 2018 is when it joined the Purpose Foundation, which is kind of like the next step, I think, from being a B Corporation. So the idea is that the company is steward owned, which means it can't be sold, and no one, including Christian, our founder, can profit or take money out of the company. So he's kind of given up that right. But for him, and I think for most of us really that work at the company, it's because we don't feel like this is something that we should own. This is something for everybody to have. And therefore, I think it's holding ourselves accountable in that way and saying that just definitely can't happen now because, we're signed into the Purpose Foundation. Yeah. So I think it's, as an employee of one of these companies, someone asked me this the other day and I was like, I guess didn't really think about it much. But I have to tell you, honestly, it's such a good feeling to work somewhere where that really is the focus, and the discussions you end up having are how much something's going to cost in terms of how many trees that potentially is in the ground, and you just kind of think it's not a bad problem really to have.
I mean, I think it's incredibly inspiring because it's so countercultural as well. To be honest, it's just a stark contrast to the way that businesses are run in the 21st century. Everything's profit, profit, profit at the cost of the environment. Where to have that sort of level playing field and to be going into business with that mindset, it's not bonkers. It's really, really great, but it's just unheard of, isn't it? It's crazy. I absolutely love it. Absolutely love it. We have run out of time, which is quite annoying. But we have set up a networking function where you can, if those of you who are in our participants and part of the audience. Lucy, I think you're going to share that shortly. Just before we do go into those networking events, we do have a couple of polls that we would like the audience to take part in. Again, Lucy, if you could pop those up for me, please. So, true or false? A mobile phone contains more than a third of the elements in the periodic table. Do that nice and short. I don't need too long to do that. I'd say 15 seconds. Be quick. What's the answer? You got it? I think it's true. It is true. So basically, I mean, and again, just quickly on that mobile phone thing, it's something I'm incredibly passionate about. So if you look here, I don't know if you can see that, it's a Fairphone. Okay, so a Fairphone is an incredible initiative that I'm massively passionate about. So I'm not sure if you know, but there's a number of metals that are only and exclusively mined in the Democratic Republic of Congo, namely cobalt, amongst another various other metals. And I'm not sure if you know about the Democratic Republic of Congo, but it's actually the most impoverished country in the world and is war-torn by civil war. And it's somewhere where child slavery exists massively. And what these guys do is all of the metals and all of the ingredients. All of the components used in it are fairly traded, and it's actually 40% recycled materials. So it's a small price for me to pay, as in it works a little bit slower than the most up-to-date Huawei or iPhone, but it's a small price to pay. It's cheaper than an iPhone, and it gives you all the benefits. And I'm not supporting child slavery. So that's just a little one in there. Now, I think if we are going to, yes, you can also, yes, big thing, very big things to it. When you order it, it comes with a little screwdriver. So let's say your camera breaks or the processor needs updating or there's a new update. So instead of buying, your new iPhone 10 to 12 or whatever the update is, literally screw it open, build your new phone. It's flipping sick. It's really, really cool. And I think they cost, I think it's like 360 or 400 quid. It's a small price to pay. So a little plug for Fairphone there. Massive fans of them. Yeah, so I think from now, I think we're going to move into our networking session. Lucy's just shared that again in the chat, where we're going to continue more conversations for about half an hour or so. Thank you all for joining us, and please stay tuned, because I'm hoping that we're going to be a little bit of a series. Amazing. Thank you.